Kia ora, welcome to this episode of the Cricket Nation cast. Ko Ben Mackey tuku ingoa. It's my pleasure in Māori Language Week to Wiki or Te Reo Māori to be joined by former BLACKCAP Adam Parore. Adam, welcome.
Ben, kia ora.
Great to have you on the cast in Māori Language Week and with some pretty exciting news. We can confirm now that this summer we're going to have the Māori Secondary Schools, both for Tama and Kotiro, back this summer, and you're going to be back involved as a mentor. What does that sort of news mean to you?
Yeah, I spoke to Andrew earlier this week. We were thrilled to get the games in last year with the secondary schools, boys and girls, and that was a huge success. Personally, I had a great time the week that I spent with them, but we were a little disappointed. The under-19s tour unfortunately was cancelled due to COVID, and caught up with Andrew recently. You know, we were only a month away from getting that in, so fingers crossed those sorts of initiatives can continue to that degree again this season and the seasons to follow.
And you picked up on my next question. You obviously mentioned that you had your first involvement last summer with the boys and girls teams down into Whanganui-a-Tara. You were going to also have some involvement at the end of the season. There was going to be the first ever Indigenous series between First Nations trophy between an Australian team and also an under-19 Māori team, and you were going to be back involved as a mentor there. Unfortunately, COVID meant that series didn't go ahead, but that was going to involve obviously some time up in Whangarei, some time at Waitangi. What were you looking forward to about that opportunity?
Well, I think there was a double header to kick us off at Eden Park, just leading into the T20 against Australia, which would have been a huge thrill for the boys and the girls. So we were looking forward to that, obviously, and always I'm from Northland, West Coast, not the East Coast, but any time that you spend in Te Tai Tokerau is pretty special. Waitangi would have been a big thrill for all of us. Personally, I've been to the marae up there a few times, but never in a formal capacity, so I was looking forward to that. So we were pretty disappointed, that the timings just sort of didn't align for us. Plus, the time that I spent involved in the Māori cricket initiative, so to speak, I really enjoyed the time being back involved with elite sport, even though it was only at a secondary school level. And being on tour again, it was just, it would have been a great thrill, and particularly seeing young players as they come through and are exposed to new experiences. And certainly Eden Park would have been one of those. Pretty special for young players to get an opportunity to play in front of a big crowd and a big stadium on a big day. So that was a huge disappointment.
Yeah, it was a frustrating time for everyone, and really exciting. Hopefully that can continue. You mentioned obviously you did get the cricket in Wellington, and the time with the different groups. The first time we'd had both a boys and a girls team together and participating in as Māori Secondary Schools teams. Your first year being involved, you had you were lucky enough to take part in the cap ceremony and present the guys their caps and also their pounamu. What was that experience like, being at the Pōneke Marae and being back, as you say, involved in a camp and working with cricket again?
Oh, it was a huge thrill for me. I spoke to a few of the board members over the course of the week, and I conveyed to them at the time I was really I've stepped away from being involved in a hands-on capacity in cricket for a number of years. I have had other career challenges and other things that have interested me, and I've sort of drifted back to the game. And I think that's a pretty natural sort of progression for players. It's in your blood, and I'll be honest, it was the only thing I wanted to do since I was 6 years of age was play cricket for New Zealand. And that sort of feeling doesn't go away as you get older, I've discovered. And whilst I've focused on other things and had a bit of time away, which has been healthy, I think, it didn't take much to draw me back. And so being back involved in that environment and being involved with a lot of the people that I played cricket with, I'm sort of showing my age here a little bit, but I played with David White and Martin Snedden. So being around those guys again was good fun. And a lot of old friendships and old memories came back. I think being involved in the Māori Cricket Initiative, I was really proud of being a part of that, and very proud of the leadership role in that field that New Zealand Cricket has taken, because I think the organisation currently is quite progressive. Their focus on diversity and inclusiveness, I think, is very important. And certainly as a former player and someone who's represented not just the organisation all around the world at times, but also as a supporter and as a fan. I thought that was something that we could really be proud of. And so to be personally involved, it was a really big thrill. Plus, you're on tour, you're back in the nets, back doing the thing that, that's what I spent my time doing when I was a kid. I was just playing cricket all day, every day. So that's a pretty natural fit for me as well.
You mentioned it being a natural fit and working with obviously the boys team and that age group of players, mainly the sort of end of their high school years. Is that, and obviously you mentioned coming back into cricket, is that an age group you enjoy working with and sort of having that mentoring role and sort of sharing some of your experiences as someone who came into cricket at a top level at a young age as well?
Yeah, it was. I found it was very much an eye-opener for me. I turned up at my first training session, having not been to a training session for the best part of a decade. And there was a lot of equipment around that I didn't recognise.
There's a bit going on.
Yeah, no, there's been some real advances made. A lot of it was familiar, but I was impressed, I've got to say, with the ability of the players, both the boys and the girls. I felt that they were certainly a lot more advanced than I was and my generation was at the same age. Very sophisticated. I spent quite a bit of time just sort of figuring out the extent of their knowledge, and I was quite amazed at how much they understood the game. I would get alongside the bowlers and the nets and talk to them about some fairly technical stuff that in my generation you learnt playing at the highest level, and these guys were right across it. So I think that certainly the young players today, they're vastly superior, in my opinion, in terms of their ability than we were sort of 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I was a youngster. And you can see that in the way they play. The advent of T20, it never occurred to us that you could just go out and start hitting every second ball out of the ground, and it turns out you can. And I played with some guys who were pretty natural stroke makers. And certainly had the ability to do that, but it just never occurred to us that you could play like that. Now everybody's doing it, and it's great to see, particularly with these young players.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, just you mentioned some of the players involved. The first year, for example, in terms of just talented athletes, you had guys like Ruben Love in the inaugural team, who's now in the Wellington Lions and going down sort of more rugby path. But guys like Ollie White and Reece Mariu, and then more recently Ryan Jackson, who was involved with the group you were spending time with, both all three in the New Zealand Under-19 environment. So some great connections there in terms of some really high quality players.
Yeah, we saw some good cricket in the few days that I was involved down in Wellington. And I said to a few of the board members and the coach that I was expecting that some of these guys would move pretty quickly through the ranks, and that you would see them starting to play at a senior level in first class and second level in cricket pretty shortly. And it sounds to me like that's starting to happen. And you'll see it again over the next 12 to 18 months. There'll be a good number of them that will go on to senior representative honours pretty quickly, because they are precocious. They're physically developed, obviously, and they've got a good understanding of how to play the game, and they're talented players. And I think also the thing that I've noticed is that there's a very clear professional pathway now. The disciplines and the understandings that you need to be successful at a professional level, these guys and girls have got that already. They understand the drills, they understand the time commitment and the structure, and that's quite different from when I was playing. I came in at the end of sort of semi-professionalism, and when my career ended, the game was fully professional. But it's gone up a level since then. I think you're seeing that right across all of the codes. It's a lot more international focused at a domestic representative level, with initiatives like the Big Bash and the T20 and Super Rugby in the rugby field. The netballers are playing in Australia. The basketballers are playing in Australia. The domestic scene here is a lot more advanced, and that's been noticeable over the last decade. And you're starting to see that sort of the talent is advancing at the same level. So I expect to see that through the young Māori players as well.
And is that something that's exciting? I mean, you mentioned you're kind of obviously over a decade-long playing career, and then you've had a bit of time outside of the game, but coming back in as in the sort of mentoring role, but also just as a fan of cricket. And does that excite you, seeing that change and seeing those pathways there for players coming through the levels and having these opportunities?
Yeah, it does. I think as a spectator sport, the game's improving exponentially. Test matches, I mean, the way the young guys are playing Test cricket these days it's a compelling product, and it needs to be. And I think you're starting to see that come through, particularly in the young Māori players. I mean, they've got flair for a start. That goes without saying. There's no sort of wilting violets in amongst this group, right? They're there to play. And they get on with the job. And I think the brand of cricket that they play is pretty free-spirited, and that's encouraged. Like we made a point this year, and I think that as we define the culture of our group going forwards, that the culture will be that you're encouraged to play in a way that expresses as much of your personality and your preparation as you can. It's good to watch, and it's fun to play. The guys enjoy it, and we celebrate each other's success. And I think the Māori environment allows that type of culture to be pushed forward, because it is a little more relaxed, and I think you've seen that right through the various codes. And the obvious example is probably the oldest of the group, which is the Māori rugby team. I mean, they play an expressive sort of Pacific Island, Polynesian-based running game, and the cricketers we encourage to do the same. It's very much a single scenario.
And is that something that you, obviously in your first year with the squad now, but then moving into the future as this initiative and these programs developed? You obviously mentioned NZC working on that, and obviously you're being involved again, that a key part of your role is sort of in that mentorship and role is to kind of help establish that culture and a way of bringing this group together each summer, and how that continues in the future, sort of establishing that early on.
Yeah, very much so. I see the management team is sort of quite diverse. We work across the coaching, mentoring, and the management roles. So the structure is slightly different to your sort of traditional cricket hierarchy, which is, there's a coaching staff, there's a support staff in terms of physios, and then there's a management group. And certainly I think the way that our group will shape up in the future, the natural fit for us is to be across it all. So we all get in and help with the drills. The senior guys pick up the cones at the end. Everybody mucks in, rolls their sleeves up and gets their hands dirty, and we're supportive right across the group. So, the mental skills side of it and the ability to pass on experiences is covered off right across the management team, and so I was involved in that part of it as well. And it's really exciting, Ben, to be a part of being able to set a culture. Often you come into groups where the culture is set, and that can be difficult to change. So to have the opportunity to be a part of it in the formative sort of years, so to speak, it's a big thrill. It's exciting. It's good fun. I mean, again, let's be clear around this. We're doing this because we enjoy it. It's fun. That's the point.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of New Zealand cricket's values is fun. So it's great to be able to see that in an environment, in what is a high performance environment. Obviously, these guys and girls are selected from around the country to represent obviously their iwis and their families, and also to have a go at playing cricket on a bigger stage as well. And you mentioned it's a rare opportunity to start a cultural or environment from the start. So that's exciting. That challenge is getting you so excited as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it again this year. I spoke to Andrew a couple of days ago, and the planning is well underway for this season. Obviously, we've got one eye to the future in terms of the structure that COVID will allow us to operate within, but fingers crossed, we'll see both the secondary schools, boys and girls team back out on the paddock this summer, and looking forward to what other sort of fixtures we can slot in. The commitment from New Zealand cricket is absolute, which is nice to be a part of. And as I said previously, that T20 curtain raiser was going to be a big thrill for the young players who are going to be involved in it. So expect to see those sorts of initiatives available. That is the sort of thing that the administration is casting its mind to.
Brilliant. And in terms of just touching on, you mentioned that across the coaching, management, support staff group, obviously all offering your different experiences. You touched on just at the start, obviously taking on some different challenges post playing cricket yourself. I mean, in terms of the experiences you're able to pass on, did you find that you were giving some examples from both your cricket playing life, but also you obviously have had since extensive experience in business and other sports as well, mountaineering. Is that something that you're able to sort of to pass on experiences, or did you use the range of experiences across talking to the group across the time you were down in Wellington?
Yeah, I think, Ben, one of the things that you learn with age is that, it's very easy to get wrapped up in the thing that you're most passionate about to the exclusion of everything else, and that's quite a natural sort of process. Certainly in my case, that was the place that I found myself, and so the ability to step away from that, to have a more holistic view, and be a little bit less focused on the elite sport performance part of the role and a little bit more holistic is quite, well, I've found in my experience, it creates better players and better people. And so I was able to help the guys a bit with that sort of stuff from my experiences. And they range from some sort of extraordinary highs to some pretty deep lows, and that's life. That's how it works. You can't hit it out of the park every day, so to speak. And certainly my journey has been very much that. And I was able to talk to them around, just bringing a bit of balance to it. So playing different sports and continuing to have different interests and trying not to be too laser-like focused on one thing, which there's a time and a place for that, but it's not all the time. So, a few grey hairs and a few years makes it a little easier to appreciate some of these things.
I certainly imagine, and the feedback, certainly talking to Andrew in preparation for having a chat to you, Adam, he did say that some of the different things, as you say, that certainly not just from cricket, but from the scape of your life and different things you've been involved with and done, seemed to really have an impact on the guys when you did share some of those stories. So it sounded like being able to share, as you say, not just in a cricketing sense, but just the story of your own life and your own experiences sound like it had a real impact on the squad.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that the young guys respond to is just a sense of being a bit real, and the fact that you can have some great achievements, but part of that too is there's some difficulty that comes along with it, and there's some challenges and some struggles. It's not all sort of happy days, sadly, and the odd happy day here and there makes it worthwhile. So just to be able to convey to them that if you're feeling a little out of sorts, that's normal. That happens, and it's just a natural part of it. But don't be afraid to go and ask for some help, because there's plenty of people around, in my experience, and that's the case even to this day, who are very generous with their time and with their energy and want to help. And that's the kind of environment that I think that young sports people respond well to, and the sort of environments we need to build for them.
Certainly, another piece that Andrew passed on, actually, also you were sort of leading by example in another sense. I understand you're also first up in the marae in the morning and out for a run, and so leading from example and a fitness and looking after yourself perspective as well. It's
a bit more of a walk these days, to be honest, and there's the occasional run, but it's I'm almost 50, so I'm not quite moving at the same speed as I used to. And a little bit of age makes it a lot easier to get out of bed early too, I can tell you. That's just sort of part of the process of getting a little older, a little wiser.
Well, you do, obviously, you mentioned, obviously, you hit your career earlier in terms of the time span, obviously wicket-keeping for 12 years of Test cricket, that'll take it out of the body, certainly. I mean, just to kind of segue on to your own time playing cricket, I mean, you mentioned coming in at the start of a sort of changing time in cricket in general. In 1990, you make your Test debut over in Birmingham. There was a guy called Sir Richard Hadley who was playing his last Test. You managed to snare a few off him in the first Test. Can you take me back to Birmingham, to Edgbaston in 1990, and tell me what that was an experience like as a young kid almost, making your debut for New Zealand? You said it's the thing you kind of dreamt of doing. What was that like?
Yeah, well, I was a kid. I didn't think I was, but again, as you look back on these things, you do realise how sort of young and immature you were. I mean, I played a lot of cricket by that stage, but it was a big day for me. My kids still scratch their heads when I tell them I played with Sir Richard. So yeah, they say, "Well, that's how old you are, Dad." I was like, "Yeah." that was a big step up. I mean, I still have a lot of really fond memories of that and that playing group. And I feel very privileged and very fortunate to have been lucky enough to play with Sir Richard and Smithy, John Wright, Martin Crowe, Jeff Crowe, Martin Snedden, Braces, the legends of the game when I grew up, and still in my mind now. I think that's one thing you don't outgrow. So to be able to spend my sort of formative years in the professional game and in the international game playing with those players, I've got a lot of really special memories to look back on. And that's, I think, a lot of the way that I interact with young players today is based on the things that I learned back in that time, where a lot of those guys I just mentioned were a lot older than me, right? They were in their mid-20s, and I was a young 19, a very young, immature 19, and pretty sheltered, and we didn't have much in common. It was, they all had kids, and I was sort of just out of school, so there was a bit of a gap to bridge, so to speak, and I'm really conscious of that when I talk to these young players today. Just making sure that they're feeling comfortable in the environment, that the older guys and the younger guys connect, and that there's, that's the sort of thing that knits a team together. So it was a pretty formative experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, coming in at 19 and there's a guy on your team sheet that's got a Sir in front of his name.
Yeah, well, that was pretty unique. He was actually, Sir Richard was knighted on that tour. So that was a pretty big thrill for all the guys on the side, and something that was pretty unusual. There hadn't been too many of them at that stage. I think Sir Garfield Sobers had been knighted, and one or two others of the West Indians and a couple of the Englishmen, but it was uncharted territory, so to speak. So that was a big thrill for all of us.
Yeah, I can certainly imagine. I mean, you were Test Cap 171, so I was doing the numbers last night, and then we fast forward a few years to 2002 at Eden Park, and in your final test, and Andre Adams made his test debut, played his only test in that game. He was Test Cap 219, so you saw a few players come into the environment in that time in your 12 years playing for the Test side, including two guys who went on to become the most Test Cap players ever, and Dan Vittori and Stephen Fleming. You mentioned, sort of alluded before to some of the guys you played with in that time. 12 years in international cricket is a remarkably long time. It's a very impressive feat. I mean, what are your sort of memories that you like to look back on of that time? And I appreciate it's quite a broad question, but what do you sort of look back fondly of that time you were involved, not just in Test cricket, but Commonwealth Games? Cricket's coming back to the Commonwealth Games, which was quite remarkable after the last being there in 98. You had the knockout trophy in 2000. You saw some things, Adam.
Yeah, we had a pretty good run. I don't remember a lot of the cricket, but I do remember the special times you spent in the dressing room with your mates, particularly after you'd won. I remember the way I felt. I don't remember much about the things we did, but occasionally Sky flips a few things up on the TV for you to jog your memory, so to speak. I think for us, and the Commonwealth Gold, we picked up a medal. We got a bronze medal in that, so that was a pretty special sort of moment. I haven't seen that medal for a while. It was hanging on my daughter's bedroom door at one stage for a little while, and it sort of disappeared again, so I'm not sure what happened to that. I must go and have for it.
There was always a sticking point between Craig McMillan and Chris Donaldson, actually, and the support staff group in the BLACKCAPs, the Commonwealth Games medal chat.
That was a great experience. We'd never been involved in that type of environment before, so that was pretty unique. We came across a young player in that tournament called Shoaib Akhtar, who went on to sort of terrify everybody for a decade after, and had a pretty interesting experience with him in the semi-final where they beat us. I think probably in terms of the cricket, the memory that sticks most is probably the Australian tour in 2001, and particularly that Test match in Perth, where we had that great Australian side on the run for sort of best part of 4.5 days. And as a group, I think if you speak to all of the guys who participated in that tour and in that match, and the coaching and support staff as well, they'll tell you that there was a lot of work went into getting us as a team to that level. And we were on the wrong end of a few decent floggings from that Australian side over time. So that was to turn the tables on them and actually hold them for a while. And we could have won that series. We were pretty unlucky with some of the umpiring. So that was probably one of the highlights, but there was a few. We had Test victories in England that were unique. won a series in England for the first time. Could rattle off a whole pile of different tournaments that we won. And also, I think at an individual level, some of the guys that I played with have gone on to have extraordinary careers. I remember young Brendan McCullum turning up at some of these training camps as a pretty fresh-faced 16-year-old and understanding at that stage that this guy had pretty special talent. There was it was pretty special to be a part of a lot of that. And with time, I think you look back and you start to appreciate it. It's different to appreciate it to quite the same degree when you're a part of it because you're right in it. But stepping back and watching from the outside, a lot of us, I think, would agree that we were pretty lucky to be a part of a pretty special environment and a very special time for New Zealand cricket.
Certainly, and you mentioned, I guess, that the transition from coming in as a young, naive 19-year-old into an environment of very seasoned players. I mean, guys like Sir Richard and Ian Smith, as you say, and Martin Crowe and John Wright, guys who'd been part of that significant success that New Zealand cricket enjoyed in the 80s, and then kind of, I guess, transitioning from being that young person to being a senior pro in the side. And it sounds like that's kind of obviously an experience that you obviously feel very lucky to have had.
Yeah, it was. I felt very privileged to have played sort of professional sport for 12 to 15 years, I think. And was a member of some pretty special teams from the Auckland sides when I was very young, so 17, 18, right through to the BLACKCAP teams that I was a part of. And I think one of the things I've appreciated in recent years is just the education that you get along the way, not just in cricket terms, but in life. And again, you probably don't appreciate the benefits and the learnings that you're picking up as you go through, but as you move on and sort of spread your wings outside of the cricketing environment, a lot of things you learn, they hold you in pretty good stead in life generally. And I think, particularly in business, a lot of the stuff I learned as being a part of that team has been very. There's been some great lessons that are equally applicable to the business scenario as life moves on. And so I feel pretty privileged and pretty fortunate to have done that. Sport's a unique thing. You learn how to have very constructive relationships with a group of very diverse people who wouldn't necessarily be your best mates, but you develop some very special friendships in quite a unique way. And I think that's something that if you speak to a lot of former players, they'd probably say the same thing.
I mean, you just make me think of, we had on the first episode of the Cricket Nation cast, we had Jake Horam on talking to Trent Boult, and one of the things that obviously Jake mentioned was kind of has echoes of what you're saying there around, particularly with Test cricket, around the toil that you put in together. And Willie had asked him if what he kind of missed about cricket or what he looked back about on his career, and he talked about the effort that goes into a team performance and succeeding, if it's a campaign or a series or just the collective feeling you have after winning a Test match in particular, and he would have loved to have had that feeling a few more times. And obviously his career was sort of upset by injury at different times, but that seemed to be a real key reflection for him, those are those special moments that you really took a lot from into your life.
Yeah, I think the Test match is very special for that reason. And I mean, it's certainly for me, that was the pinnacle of the game. I expect it's probably the same now, because it does take such a long time to play, obviously, over 5 days. Conditions change. There's a huge amount of preparation that goes into learning how to play the game at that level from the time that you're a kid right through. You don't just wake up one day and become good at Test cricket. It is the ultimate test for a reason. And so when you are successful in that environment, it does mean a lot. And I think certainly the memories that I have are of winning Test matches and the time that you spend with your mates afterwards. In my life, it's been a pretty unique sort of experience. Nothing that I've had has really sort of paralleled it. And so I think on that basis, you do look back on those moments and those memories very fondly. And the occasion that you bump into the guys that were a part of that, your old teammates, and that does happen every now and then. Those are the sort of things that sort of come to the fore over a few beers. And, that's always it's always a pretty enjoyable night when that happens.
I can imagine. Certainly, I mean, I'm lucky enough to occasionally spend some time around the team environment now, and you certainly get that sense. For example, down in Wellington, this year for Ross's 100th test, which ended up being New Zealand's 100th test win. Just what that kind of means to the collective when they work hard for that number of days. That was only ended up being 4 days of test cricket, but just when you get a complete team performance, it does clearly mean a lot to the group.
Yeah, it does. I think that's what we were lucky enough to finally get to. I mean, we had pretty high standards, and we had a number of players who were, absolutely at the peak of the best players in the world in the time that I played, and they had very high expectations. So, when we performed the way that we did in Australia in 2001, we had a lot of individuals stepping up, putting their hands up and putting, truly world-class performances on the board against what I think is probably the best cricket team of all time. And couple that with a team performance that was exceptional. At the end of a tour or a trip like that, there's a lot of, there's a lot of release, because particularly that tour, that was years in the making, those performances. And I think, if you talk to Roscoe, he'd probably say the same thing, that performance and him achieving the pinnacle of 100 test matches is pretty extraordinary. And when you think about it from the perspective of being a young kid when you first start to play, and somebody says you're going to play X number of games or 100 tests or whatever it is, it takes a little bit to wrap your head around. So there's certainly some depressurizing that goes on afterwards.
Certainly. And just in terms of that personal success and the team success as well, you were the first keeper for New Zealand to take 200, be involved in 200 dismissals. BJ Watling's now advanced that record. What was that kind of like, and as an observer of the team now, is it something that makes you sort of proud to see someone kind of advancing the black cap and kind of taking that to another level? And obviously he's been involved with three of our now modern day very successful bowlers. What is it like observing some of the progress the team's making at the moment for you?
I think there's a real kinship to that sort of thing. I mean, I think if you speak to all of the former players, we get a real thrill out of the guys that have come behind us, winning and doing well personally and excelling. And certainly in my case, I remember the day that I sort of snuck past Smithy's record, and I was really proud of that. And Smithy was thrilled because he'd had a lot to do with me when I was a young kid. And the same with BJ. It's always nice to see milestones being exceeded, your own as well. And I remember how that felt. So, I was really chuffed for BJ. I think he's gone on to have an extraordinary career. I look at his batting record, and I appreciate how hard it is to score test hundreds. And he's really has had a stellar career that he can be very, very proud of. Because it's not easy. Keeping wicket in test matches and making hundreds is difficult, I can tell you.
You're coming from a very educated position, and that actually just prompts one of my final questions. When I was having a bit of a look through the stats in preparation for having a chat to you, Adam, one of the things that really leapt out to me, and it kind of sort of came in as a bit of a parallel to some of the other pursuits you've looked at post cricket, is that you clearly thrive in very tough conditions. And I was looking at your ODI record. I think it's 14 scores over 50, 13 of them made away from New Zealand. What is it about sort of foreign conditions? I mean, obviously you've gone on to climb mountains and things like that. What is it about conditions that are foreign that are sort of so excite you or set you as a challenge?
Yeah, I've got a history of sort of thriving in adversity. I'm not quite sure what that's about, but I think for me, being a part of the touring environment was always pretty inspiring. I quite liked being able to focus to the exclusion of everything else on the game and on putting in the performances to help the team win and do well. And being in a touring environment certainly encourages that. There's not a lot else to do, to be honest. And so that was quite a natural sort of fit for me. And I like to travel, particularly to the subcontinent. I struggled to sort of get my head around how it worked.
It looks like you love Sharjah.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed Sharjah. India, subsequently I've spent a lot of time in the Himalaya. I was lucky enough to spend a season in the Karakoram in Pakistan, which is just simply breathtaking. And I feel quite at home in those places. Certainly when in recent years when I've been in the Himalaya and the Karakoram climbing, I feel quite at home there because they're mad cricket fans. So there's always, sort of plenty of chat around the game. You'll be surprised at being asked what the latest score is from some game that's happening around the world at sort of 7,500 metres on the side of a mountain, with some guy we met before going the other way, or one of the Sherpas wants to find out what's happening to Pakistan and Sharjah. It does sort of, really does sort of snap your head back a little bit. Just the level of passion in that part of the world, and I've always sort of quite enjoyed that. They are completely nuts for their cricket. I try to explain it to people here in New Zealand, and it's not that easy to explain, but they live and breathe it. And, I've always found that type of environment in the subcontinent particularly to be, quite inspiring and, really good fun as well.
Do you feel quite lucky to having that kind of instant? I mean, we just in terms of, as you say, it's a massive audience, and we know just from the visitors to New Zealand cricket website, even for example, so much of it comes from that part of the world. Is it a pretty inspiring thing to have that instant connection when you go over there and have that cricket connection and also that New Zealand connection to that part of the world? Yeah,
it is. I think being a New Zealander in India, we've always been very, very well received, and I think there is a natural affinity between the two nations. The players, from my experience, have always related well to each other, and I formed some really strong friendships with the Indian and Pakistani players that I played against that continue to this day. Certainly the wicket keepers, we're still in touch regularly, and I think and in terms of the mountain climbing that I did as well, again, being a New Zealander in the Himalaya is quite an extraordinary experience. From the times of Sir Edmund right through, Kiwis are loved and revered right the way through the Himalaya. So that's pretty inspiring to be a part of. They pick your accent straight off, and it's one of the few places in the world that I've been where you're made to feel at home immediately. A lot more so than the Australians. Nobody's really too fussed about the Aussies up there. So as a Kiwi, sort of enjoyed that dynamic as well.
It's certainly some amazing stories, and just to kind of, I guess, wrap things up, Adam, and thank you very much for your time again. In terms of your future challenges, obviously you're going to be back involved with the Māori teams in terms of your own pursuits like the mountain climbing. Have you got any big climbs coming up, or is COVID put paid to those kind of plans, or how are you going with that?
Yeah, no plans at the moment. And the mountaineering does take a lot out of you emotionally, so it's not unusual to go sort of 2 or 3 years and sort of not give it too much thought, and then all of a sudden, some set of circumstances will conspire and it's back on the table again. So that's been the case for a few years, and certainly at the moment with COVID, international travel and being sort of any more adventurous than is absolutely necessary is probably not really a thing. And I've got my hands full here in New Zealand with business and family and a few other commitments. And I sort of taking the opportunity to focus a little more on some other initiatives, and supporting, the secondary schools Māori cricket initiative is one of the things that's pretty high on my list. So looking forward to summer and getting stuck back in again.
Brilliant. And I've got just 2 quick questions to finish with. You've kind of touched on them slightly already, but the first is the player you most enjoyed keeping to in terms of your craft, and then also you mentioned that the early 2000s, late 90s Aussie team is the best side you saw, but best player you saw in terms of opposition and one you really enjoyed watching, that whether that be a batsman or a bowler.
I think in terms of the player I enjoyed keeping to most, that would be Daniel. He and I felt pretty privileged to have this young kid turn up, and he was a magician, right? Watching just the degree of maturity he brought to his craft as a 17-year-old was impressive, and I was a bit of a veteran by that stage, and I was not easy to impress. And then watching him just develop, and watching him develop me too. I mean, he made me a much better player, much better wicket keeper. And so we formed a pretty special bond and a very special friendship. And I think we helped each other out a bit, but along the way, I got a pretty good view of a guy that I regard as probably the best left armour of his generation. So that was a real highlight for me. In terms of the best players that I saw or played against, there was a few to pick from.
Generation.
I think probably the guy that struck me most was Sir Vivian Richards, but it's hard to pick one out. there was Lara, there was Tendolka, the list goes on and on. Mark Ward, I think, thought was pretty majestic to watch. There was just so many of the batters, and the bowlers, I sort of felt a little like we ended up with, this battery of express pace bowlers that sort of, the timing was poor from my perspective. But
there was no matter where you were touring, there was no let up in your era, was there?
It was pretty relentless, right? From Shoaib Akhtar and Anil Donald through to Ambrose and the West Indian Pace Brigade, Brett Lee, the list goes on and on. So, and then in terms of the spinners, I played a lot of cricket against Warney, Murali Dharan. I feel the generation that I played against was some of the greatest players of all time. Wasim Akram, I always thought was just a complete freak. So to sit back now and have been a part of that, and to have performed against those guys at times, and also to have been worked over pretty good by most of them at times as well. I look back on both experiences with equal fondness, but I think probably the one that stood out as just being a little bit different to the rest was Sir Vivian. When I came in as a young player, the West Indies were right at their peak and dominating. And he was at his pomp, so to speak, and just his physical presence was intimidating. There's a bit of magic in it for sure.
I can imagine, and certainly even one of those players you can imagine that would have thrived no matter when he found himself on a cricket field, whether it was teleported in time to another era. You can just see him. I know I've obviously only seen him on newsreel type footage, but yeah, just no matter when he was playing cricket, you can imagine him being a star.
Yeah, the stats are a little misleading. You look at the contemporary players today and their numbers vastly exceed the guys of the 70s and 80s, or 80s and 90s. But I think you need to take the numbers and put them into a little bit of context. There's a little bit more to it than just what the stats tell. And I think Sir Viv's a pretty good example of that. And there's a few others that I've mentioned as well.
Adam, I'll leave it there. I've taken up a lot of your time, so I really appreciate your time. Adam Parore, kia ora.
Kia ora, Ben. Thank you.